The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains, turning the living room golden. The smell of cardamom tea lingered as she ironed her son's white kurta, the one he would wear when they visited the girl's family for the engagement announcement next week. Every crease had to be perfect, every thread a prayer. She hummed under her breath, smiling at the thought of finally seeing her son's happiness settled. Her phone buzzed on the side table. She wiped her hands and answered, expecting his voice. "Hello, Beta." A pause, then a soft, polite voice, one she knew. "Auntie, I just wanted to tell you, we got married yesterday." The iron slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Steam hissed up, sharp and white, like a ghost escaping. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "I beg your pardon," she whispered, pressing the phone tighter against her ear. The girl repeated it slowly, as if kindness could soften the cruelty. "We got married yesterday." Something inside her chest cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but like glass beneath a thick carpet. Her lips parted, but no words came. In the silence, she could hear the faint sound of traffic outside, the neighbor's television, the clock ticking life continuing as if nothing had ended. She managed to ask, almost mechanically, "Does my son know you're calling me?" A murmur, then another voice, muffled but unmistakable, his. "Yes, Auntie," the girl said, her tone shrinking to a whisper. "He's right here." Her hand trembled. She wanted to laugh, to shout, to ask if this was some foolish prank. But all she could do was stare at the iron lying on the floor, leaving a black mark on the fabric, the very spot she had pressed too long. She straightened slowly, her breath shallow, her eyes dry. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking, the girl, her son, or fate itself. Then she hung up, the room echoing with a silence so sharp it almost had sound. And in that silence, she heard the sound of her heart changing shape. She sat on the edge of the sofa long after the call ended, the phone still in her hand, screen dark. The world around her felt strangely distant, the ticking clock too loud, the tea gone cold, the air heavy with something unspeakable. Her mind tried to make sense of it, stitching explanations out of disbelief. Maybe they had a court marriage for visa papers. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe they'd tell her everything tomorrow. But tomorrow had already come and gone without her. She stood and began packing the room, her fingers fidgeting with her dupatta. Every corner of the house carried traces of the son she had raised alone. His cricket trophies on the shelf, his graduation photo on the wall, the tiny scratch on the dining table from the year he learned to write. She had built this home for him, dream by dream. And now, every object seemed to mock her. You didn't even deserve to be told. By evening, her phone filled with unread messages, cousins asking when the engagement was, her sister reminding her about the tailor, her neighbor sending heart emojis. Each one felt like salt pressed into an invisible wound. She rehearsed excuses in her mind. "Oh, it's been postponed, they're waiting for the right date. Something small first, then a celebration later." The lies sounded smoother than the truth. She dialed her son's number 3 times. Each attempt ended in a dull, repetitive ring, followed by silence. She stared at the contact photo, his smiling face, arm draped casually around the girl who had just broken her world with a single sentence. Sleep never came that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a slow question. What did I do wrong? By morning, she decided to face it, not for answers, but for proof. She prepared a box of sweets, carefully tied with a gold ribbon. To anyone else, it might look like a gesture of joy. To her, it was armor. The sun was merciless when she arrived at his apartment. The building guard greeted her with awkward surprise. "Madam, congratulations," he said with a smile. She nodded weakly, her throat tightening. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. When the door opened, it wasn't her son who stood there, it was her. The girl she had once hoped to welcome as a daughter-in-law. Now, already a bride. Her wrists jingled with new glass bangles. Her hands were still stained deep with mehndi. The air inside smelled faintly of incense and bridal perfume. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. "Oh, Auntie," the girl began, guilt flickering across her face. "Please come in." "Where is he?" the mother asked quietly. Before the girl could answer, her son appeared in the hallway, hair damp, avoiding her eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He only said, "Amy, I was going to tell you." She felt something hollow bloom inside her, not anger, but an emptiness too vast to describe. Her gaze drifted to the walls, adorned with wedding garlands, to the sofa, where unopened gift boxes lay waiting. The scene looked complete without her. She placed the box of sweets on the table. Her hands were steady now. "Congratulations," she said softly. "I brought these for you both." The girl took the box with trembling fingers. The mother smiled faintly, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "May your secrets stay sweet longer than your love." The next few days passed in a kind of half-light, not quite day, not quite night. She moved through her routines like a shadow tracing old walls, doing everything and feeling nothing. The house, once so full of his voice, now echoed with the absence of it. Each object seemed to conspire to remind her. The chipped mug with his name on it, the cricket bat resting against the wardrobe, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe where she used to measure his height every birthday. Her hands lingered on the marks, the smallest one almost faded now from when he was 5. She could still hear the way he used to giggle when she told him, "Someday you'll be taller than Amy." That memory unfolded easily, a warm, sunlit afternoon when she'd made his favorite aloo parathas. He'd been chasing a balloon through the living room, his laughter tumbling across the floor like marbles. Then, suddenly, a crash, his father's shout. She remembered stepping between them, her heart hammering as she said, "He's just a child, please." That was the day she learned that protection sometimes came dressed as silence. After the divorce, it had just been the two of them. She took an extra shift at the school, packed lunches at dawn, and spent evenings tutoring neighborhood children so he could have the life she couldn't. Every exam, every fever, every small triumph, he had looked at her with that same boyish gratitude, as if to say, "You're all I need." But now, remembering his recent months, she began seeing the truth threaded between small details she had ignored. He had grown quieter. Calls that once came twice a day became once a week. When she asked if he'd be home for dinner, he'd say, "Amy, I'm caught up, some work thing." Work had become his alibi for everything. She remembered his distracted tone, how his laughter now sounded half borrowed. And then there was the girl, always polite, always distant. The first few times they met, she had seemed sweet but cautious. The mother told herself it was shyness. But now, replaying every interaction, she heard something else, a rehearsed politeness that never reached the eyes. One evening, a few months before the wedding, she'd asked casually, "Beta, is everything okay between you two?" He had smiled too quickly. "Of course, Amy. Don't worry so much." She hadn't pushed further. She had trusted him. That trust now felt like an unopened letter, sealed, delivered, but never read. She poured herself a cup of tea, staring at the thin curl of steam rising into nothing. The air in the house felt thick with echoes of laughter, of apologies, of years she couldn't touch anymore. On the mantel, the framed graduation photo caught her eye. He was in his cap and gown, grinning wide, her arm around him. It had been raining that day, she remembered, and yet the photo looked like sunshine. She traced the outline of his face in the picture. How easily pride and love could blur into blindness. Maybe she should have known when he stopped finishing his sentences, when his hugs became shorter, when he began talking more about we and less about I. The clues had been there, scattered like crumbs, his evasive tone, his sudden weekend work trips, the way he'd flinch when she mentioned wedding plans. Each time, she'd chosen to believe what comforted her most, that he was busy, not drifting away. She closed her eyes and let the truth settle. It didn't arrive like a wave. It crept in like mist, slow, quiet, undeniable. The betrayal wasn't only in the marriage. It was in the slow fatting of a bond she had thought unbreakable. She sat back, her fingers wrapped around the cooling teacup. Through the open window, children's laughter floated in from the street, high, wild, and innocent, just like his once was. And as she listened, a realization struck with gentle finality, not bitter, but hollow. She realized the distance hadn't begun with a wedding. It began the day he stopped calling her first. By the third day, the news had learned to walk on its own legs. It slipped through whispers, traveled across WhatsApp groups, and arrived uninvited into her neighborhood. Every conversation seemed to pause when she appeared. The vegetable seller's smile stiffened. The neighbor's door closed a little faster. Even the milkman began greeting her with forced politeness. The story had spread faster than she could have imagined. Her son married in secret, without the mother's blessing, without even inviting her. At first, she thought she could pretend not to care. She swept the courtyard, watered the plants, and tried to hold her head high when women outside discussed today's generation. But the humiliation wasn't loud. It was quiet, creeping, precise. It came in the form of pity disguised as sympathy. "Such a shock for you, Babai," one woman said over the gate, voice dripping honey. "These children, they act without thinking, poor you. You must have been heartbroken." She smiled politely, her palms pressing against each other to keep them from trembling. "Children grow up," she replied, her tone even. "They make their choices." But when she went inside and closed the door, her throat burned with the unshed scream. By afternoon, the phone calls began. An aunt from Lahore called just to confirm. Another cousin messaged, "So happy for the new couple. Why didn't you tell us?" Each word was another small cut, invisible but deep. She typed out responses, deleted them, typed again, deleted again. Eventually, she stopped replying altogether. That evening, her sister came by unannounced, bringing homemade biryani and the kind of pity only family can offer. "You should talk to him," her sister urged gently. "He's still your son. Maybe the girl forced him. Maybe he was afraid you'd say no." The mother smiled faintly. "Fear doesn't hide love," she said. "It hides guilt." They ate in silence after that. Even the biryani tasted like ashes. When night fell, she stood by the window, watching the neighbors' lights blink out one by one. The air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, the kind that belongs to people who have not been forgotten. Her eyes moved to the small wooden chest on her dressing table, the one that held her wedding jewelry. She opened it slowly, lifting the soft red cloth that covered the contents. Beneath it, the gold bangles gleamed faintly, catching the light like captured fire. She had saved them for years, cleaned them every Eid, kept them wrapped, polished, waiting. They weren't just ornaments, they were symbols of continuity, of legacy, of a love passed down from mother to daughter-in-law. Her fingers traced the edges. They felt cold, almost unfamiliar. She remembered the first time she'd told her son about them. He was 13, sitting cross-legged on the floor doing his homework. "These will be for your wife one day," she had said teasingly. He had laughed, cheeks reddening, and replied, "Then she better be as kind as you, Amy." She had believed him, believed in that boy. Now, years later, that boy had become a man she no longer recognized. One who could share vows, take blessings from strangers, and yet forget the woman who gave him his first prayer. Tears welled up, hot and unexpected. She let them fall this time silently, without wiping them away. Each tear left a small mark on the gold, as if baptizing it in grief. She took the bangles out, one by one, and laid them on the table. The sound they made, a faint metallic chime, felt like the closing of a chapter. Her reflection in the mirror looked older than she remembered. Tired eyes, lips pressed into a thin line, dignity hanging by a thread. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, not rage, not despair, but a quiet finality. She placed the empty box back into the drawer. For the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the sky. The air shifted, heavy, expectant, cleansing. She walked to the veranda, stood there for a while, and let the first drops of rain touch her skin. The house was utterly still behind her. She whispered into the night, "Enough." Not loud, not dramatic. Just a single word to mark the end of waiting. Then she went back inside, turned off the lights, and lay down. The silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt earned. She stared into the darkness until her heartbeat steadied, her breathing slowed, and the ache inside her chest began to quieten. She decided that from tomorrow, she would stop waiting for apologies, explanations, or calls that never came. The morning light came pale and clean through the curtains, the kind that doesn't promise happiness, but something simpler, clarity. She rose early, before the neighborhood stirred, before her phone could buzz with the weight of other people's words. The house was still heavy, with traces of what should have been. Gift boxes wrapped in red, fabric samples draped over chairs, an unopened pack of invitation cards waiting for names that would never be written. For days, she had avoided this room, afraid that even looking at it would unravel her composure. But that morning, she walked in barefoot, steady. Dust floated through the air like memories that had overstayed their welcome. She picked up the invitation box first, turned it over, and smiled faintly. "Too late for your celebrations," she murmured, then set it aside. One by one, she gathered the unused decorations, silk ribbons, candles, the marigold garlands she had ordered early out of excitement. She packed them neatly, tied the box shut, and wrote in firm handwriting, "Donation." There was no bitterness in the motion, only precision, almost peace. Next, she opened the wardrobe where she had stored the embroidered shawl she had planned to wear for her son's engagement. The delicate threadwork caught the light, shimmering in gold and ivory. She ran her fingers over it, admiring it one last time, then folded it carefully into a paper bag. In the kitchen, she found the list she had written weeks ago, menu for the dinner party. She read it once, smiled, and tore it down the middle. The sound of paper tearing felt surprisingly liberating. By noon, she had swept, scrubbed, and polished the house until it smelled faintly of lemon and soap. Not grief, not expectation, just clean air. When she paused for lunch, she realized she hadn't eaten properly in days. Usually, she cooked too much, enough for two, sometimes three, out of habit. Today, she measured exactly 1 cup of rice. When the aroma filled the kitchen, she sat down alone at the table. There was a moment when her throat tightened, the instinctive ache of loneliness. But then she breathed deeply, spooned the rice onto her plate, and whispered, "Cooking for one doesn't mean I am one less." She ate slowly, without sadness, tasting every bite. The meal felt like a quiet rebellion. In the afternoon, she took out the bridal fabrics she had once bought with such excitement. Soft pastels and crimson silks folded neatly in a trunk. She smoothed each one, folded it again, and placed it in a large donation bag. When she was done, she sat on the floor beside the trunk, a faint smile resting on her lips. The house looked different now, lighter, emptier, but also freer. Later, she stood in front of the mirror, tying her hair into a loose bun. The reflection staring back no longer looked like a woman left behind. There was still sorrow, yes, but it had taken a new shape, something stronger, quieter, defined by choice. That evening, she opened her journal, the one she hadn't touched in years. On the first blank page, she wrote, "I will not let silence define me. I will define it." The sentence looked firm, unshaken. She closed the book gently, turned off the light, and stood by the window. Outside, the city pulsed faintly with life, car horns, distant laughter, the world moving on. For once, she didn't feel left out of it. She felt aligned with it, like a small but steady current flowing forward. That night, she lay in bed without checking her phone, without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. The walls didn't echo his name anymore. The quiet wasn't empty, it was hers. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming of doors closing. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps slow, deliberate, and echoing like a farewell she hadn't meant to give. It was nearly sunset when she heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, the kind that carried both hope and guilt. She was in the kitchen rinsing lentils, her hands wet, her heart still. For a long moment, she didn't move. The sound came again, firmer this time. When she opened the door, her son stood there, older somehow, though only weeks had passed. His eyes darted from the floor to her face, as if searching for permission to step inside. "Emmy," his voice cracked on the second syllable. She nodded once, stepping aside. "Come in." He hesitated, then entered, looking around the house, as though seeing it for the first time. Everything was clean, orderly, stripped of celebration. The guest room door stood ajar, empty now, the marigold garlands gone, the walls bare. He sat at the edge of the sofa, his shoulders tense, his hands clasped. She poured him tea without asking. When she placed the cup before him, he murmured, "You still make it the same way." "Yes," she said. "Some things don't change unless they're meant to." He looked down. "I know you're angry." "I was," she replied quietly. "Now, I'm just learning to stop expecting things that hurt." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We planned to tell you after the nikah, but everything moved so fast. Her parents." She raised her hand gently, cutting him off. You don't need to explain the details, Beta. Not anymore. Her calm unnerved him more than anger ever could. He fumbled for words, desperate to fill the silence. I thought you'd be upset. That you'd. That I'd what? She asked softly. Disown you. Cry. Beg. She leaned back slightly, eyes steady. I might have once, but I've learned that love that demands humiliation isn't love worth keeping. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The clock ticked loudly between them. I didn't want to hurt you, Amy. You did, she said simply, but not by marrying her. You hurt me by thinking I couldn't bear the truth. He stared at her, the weight of that sentence pressing down on his chest. I was scared, he admitted. You've always had such dreams for me, such plans. I didn't want to disappoint you. She smiled faintly, tired but tender. You think I wanted to control your life. I only wanted to see you choose it honestly. There was a pause, deep and long. She rose and walked to the cabinet, the one where she kept things too precious to throw away. From the top shelf, she pulled out a neatly folded piece of fabric, gold, and ivory thread glimmering faintly in the dim light. This, she said, holding it gently, was meant for your wedding day. I had imagined wrapping it around your shoulders before you left for your new home. He looked at the shawl, eyes glistening. Amy. She came closer, her steps unhurried. But I realize now, the shawl doesn't belong to that day. It belongs to this one. He frowned. What do you mean? She draped it across his lap, the weight of it almost symbolic. It's a reminder, she said softly, that love isn't a favor we give or take away. It's an act of truth. A marriage built on the fear of love, she looked directly into his eyes, isn't love at all. Her voice was calm, but the words sank like stones. He lowered his gaze, his fingers brushing the embroidered threads. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I ended up lying to the only person who never lied to me. She sat opposite him, hands folded in her lap. You're not the first child to forget the hands that raised you. You won't be the last. But I hope you'll remember love isn't about who wins the argument. It's about who stands in truth when it hurts the most. For a while, neither spoke. The room filled with the scent of cooling tea and the faint hum of traffic outside. He finally whispered, Can you ever forgive me? Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed level. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Beta. It's a process. I've already forgiven the child you were. The man you've become. She paused. I'm still learning to recognize him. He looked up at her then, tears brimming. I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, she said gently. But you'll need it to find your way back. He reached forward impulsively, as if to hold her hand. But she didn't move. She simply looked at him, steady, resolute. It wasn't rejection, it was boundary. You should go, she said finally. Your wife will be waiting. He nodded slowly, rising to his feet. The shawl still lay across his arms, its golden edges catching the evening light. He hesitated at the door, turning back one last time. "Amy, do you want me to return this?" She shook her head. "Keep it. Maybe one day you'll understand what it was meant to bless." He lingered for a moment, searching her face for something, anything, then stepped outside. The door closed softly behind him. Through the window, she watched him walk away, his shoulders hunched, the shawl held close to his chest. For a moment, she thought he might turn back. He didn't. She stood there long after he disappeared down the road, the air still warm from his presence. A strange peace settled over her, not triumph, not relief, but the quiet certainty that she had said everything that needed saying. He left with tears in his eyes, unsure if he had been forgiven or quietly dismissed. In the weeks that followed, the shawl remained folded neatly on a chair in her son's apartment, untouched, yet always visible. He couldn't bring himself to return it, and he couldn't bear to hide it either. It became a quiet reminder of what he had lost without quite realizing it, the ease of looking his mother in the eye without shame. The distance between him and his wife began with silences, small, ordinary ones that stretched too long. At breakfast, she scrolled through her phone while he stared into his tea. When she asked questions, his answers were brief. When he tried to smile, it never reached his eyes. One evening, as she cleared the table, she finally asked, "Have you spoken to your mother?" He hesitated. "She doesn't need to hear from me," he said softly. "She's moved on." But his voice betrayed him. He hadn't moved on. He carried her words like invisible bruises. Love that demands humiliation isn't love worth keeping. His wife didn't reply. She looked at him for a long time, the realization dawning slowly. In her attempt to hold on to him, she had helped build a wall that now shut them both out. A few days later, she visited his mother's neighborhood under the pretense of buying fabric. She saw the older woman through the window, surrounded by children, tiny heads bent over notebooks, her voice calm and steady as she guided them through their lessons. The sight made her pause. The mother had started tutoring the neighborhood kids quietly, without announcement or ceremony. It began when a little boy from next door asked for help with his Urdu homework. Then another came, and another. Soon, her living room filled each afternoon with laughter, pencils scratching, and the smell of homemade paradas. She discovered that teaching eased something inside her, not because it replaced her son, but because it reminded her of her own worth. She was not merely someone's mother, waiting by a silent phone. She was a woman with knowledge, patience, and a heart that could still give without breaking. Neighbors began to greet her differently, with respect, not pity. Parents dropped off their children with gratitude. Some evenings, she'd sit by the window after the children left, sipping tea as the sunset bathed her house in gold. The loneliness hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled her. It was simply part of her, like a healed scar that no longer throbbed. One afternoon, the bride came to her door, clutching a small box of sweets. Her eyes were downcast, her voice tentative. "Auntie, I wanted to thank you for everything you said that day." The mother looked at her kindly. "Sit, Beta." The young woman sat, fidgeting. "He's been distant," she said finally. "He blames himself, but he won't say it aloud. I think he's realizing things too late." The older woman nodded slowly. "We all do at some point." The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was filled with something softer, understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. When the girl left, the mother didn't feel anger, only a deep calm. The world, she realized, had its own ways of balancing what was broken. Her son called a week later. His voice was uncertain, hesitant. "Amy, I heard you've started teaching." "Yes," she said simply. "That's good." He wanted to say more, to ask if she missed him, to promise a visit. But her tone made it clear she didn't need his reassurance anymore. And strangely, that knowledge humbled him more than any scolding could have. She didn't hang up abruptly. She wished him peace, then returned to her students waiting in the next room. That evening, as she watched them pack their bags, one little girl ran back to hug her. "Thank you, Amy," the child said brightly. The word caught her off guard at first. Amy. She had heard it from one voice her entire life, and it had once meant everything. Now, hearing it from these children didn't reopen her wounds, it mended them. She smiled, brushing the girl's hair gently. "You're welcome, Beta." When the last child left and the room fell quiet, she looked around at the scattered notebooks, the half-finished drawings, the tiny fingerprints on her table. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. She lit a small lamp near the window and whispered a prayer, not for her son to return, but for him to grow into a man who could finally understand the weight of truth and the strength of love. Then she sat down, opened a child's essay, and began marking it with quiet focus. Outside, the evening wind stirred the curtains, carrying faint laughter from the street. Each child who called her Amy stitched one more thread into the place where her son's absence used to ache. Winter had crept in quietly, softening the city's noise. The mornings came slow, wrapped in fog, and the faint smell of chai simmering on stoves. She had settled into her rhythm, tutoring the children in the afternoons, tending her plants in the evenings, and writing in her journal before bed. The ache of the past had dulled into something gentler, something she could live beside without flinching. That morning, as she watered the tulsi by the window, a knock came at the door, timid, uncertain. She dried her hands on her dupatta, expecting perhaps a parent or a new student. But when she opened the door, the sight before her made her breath still. It was her daughter-in-law. The young woman stood there, shawl wrapped tightly around her, face pale and eyes swollen from crying. Behind the exhaustion, there was something unmistakably human, remorse. "Can I come in, Auntie?" Her voice trembled. For a long heartbeat, the older woman said nothing. The last time she had seen this girl, she'd been radiant, newly married, untouched by consequence. Now she looked fragile, the gold from her bangles replaced by the dull sheen of survival. She stepped aside quietly. "Of course, come in." The younger woman entered, setting down a small bag near her feet. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her shawl. After a pause, she whispered, "I didn't know where else to go. He's gone. Left 2 months ago. I'm staying at a friend's place, but—" Her voice broke. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly. "I'm pregnant." The words landed like a soft echo through the room. Not shocking, not dramatic, just deeply human. The mother looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the girl who had deceived her, but the woman life had already begun to humble. "Have you eaten anything today?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "Sit," she said gently, walking toward the kitchen. "I'll make tea." As the kettle hissed, she could hear faint sobs from the living room, the sound of regret too raw to hide. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, the girl was wiping her face. "I didn't come for pity," she said, her voice shaking. "I just wanted you to know you were right. About honesty. About love. I thought I could have him by keeping secrets, but secrets don't keep anyone." The older woman sat across from her, eyes calm, hands steady around the cup. "There's no victory in being right," she said softly. "Only peace in understanding." The girl looked up, tears spilling freely now. "How can you still be kind to me? After everything?" The mother smiled faintly, her voice like a quiet flame. "Because anger locks doors, Beta. And a home doesn't close its doors, people do." The girl let out a sob then, the kind that shakes the body free of pride. The mother reached across the table and touched her hand, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but of acceptance. "You can stay here," she said simply, "for as long as you need. This house has seen enough silence. It could use a bit of life again." The girl nodded, unable to speak, tears blurring her vision. The older woman rose and fetched a folded blanket from the cupboard, the same one her son used as a child. She placed it beside the girl without a word. Then she looked out the window, where the fog was beginning to lift, sunlight cutting through the haze. Inside the house, warmth returned slowly, the sound of boiling tea, the murmur of small conversation, the faint stirrings of forgiveness taking root. It wasn't the kind of ending she had once imagined, but it was real, earned, and whole. And in that moment, forgiveness felt heavier and holier than any revenge could. The house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not hollow, not aching. The air carried the soft rhythm of a newborn's breathing, the gentle rustle of a blanket shifting. She sat in the old wooden chair by the window, cradling the tiny child in her arms. The baby's skin was warm against her, his fingers curled into fragile fists, his heartbeat small and steady beneath her palm. Outside, dawn was beginning to stretch across the sky, a wash of pale gold touching the edges of the curtains. She rocked slowly, humming under her breath, the same lullaby she had once sung decades ago to a baby boy who used to fit in her arms just like this. The melody trembled with memory, with forgiveness, with the strange, circular grace of life. The baby stirred, his eyelids fluttering open for a moment. She smiled softly and whispered, "May you grow up knowing that love never leaves. It just learns where it's truly needed." Her voice lingered in the still air, a benediction carried by morning light. She looked around the room, the same walls, the same window. Yet everything had changed. Her heart no longer reached for what had been lost. It rested gently in what had been returned. Somewhere in another part of the city, her son might still be searching for peace. She no longer waited for that call. She had already answered her own. The baby yawned, his tiny mouth opening in perfect trust. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, the lullaby fading into silence. And as morning light filled the room, she realized she hadn't been forgotten, only found again in a different form.